In the popular imagination, the Trojan War is a story of great cunning and inevitable victory. We remember the wooden horse, the burning city, and the triumph of the Achaeans, which essentially laid the foundation for European identity. The fall of Troy opened the way for the Greeks to colonize the coast of Asia Minor and made the Aegean Sea their inner lake. However, the archaeological layers of Hisarlik, the real Troy, tell us that this city experienced many sieges and disasters, but was invariably reborn. Troy was not just a target for plunder, but a powerful geopolitical hub that controlled the straits between Europe and Asia. The war described by Homer was most likely a protracted trade conflict of the late Bronze Age. The Achaean coalition, loose and torn by internal contradictions, was far from home, and their resources were not unlimited. The historical reality is that prolonged sieges in antiquity were more likely to end in failure for the attackers due to disease and supply problems than to the fall of walls. What if Odysseus' famous trickery had not worked? Or more likely, what if the coalition of kings had simply collapsed under the weight of internal strife and logistical deadlock? This is a scenario in which sacred Iliad remains standing and the Greek ships return home in disgrace. In this world, there would be no Iliad as a hymn to the heroism of the victors. An Aegean civilization would take a completely different path of development, ceding dominance to Anatolia. Watch the video to the end to find out how the history of the fall of Troy might have changed. To understand how things could have turned out differently, let's look at the balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean in the 13th century BC. It was an era when different peoples were interacting more and more closely with each other, and their lives depended not only on their own strength, but also on their ability to negotiate with their neighbors. Trade routes stretched for thousands of kilometers, connecting coasts, islands, and major powers that were constantly trying to maintain a fragile balance of interests. These ties were not smooth and peaceful. Great powers such as Egypt closely monitored what was happening in neighboring lands, as this determined the supply of grain, wood, copper, and tin, without which it was impossible to maintain an army and construction. The Egyptian pharaohs maintained a network of diplomatic contacts, exchanging letters and gifts with the rulers of the Hittites and Assyria. Such correspondence has survived to this day and shows how complicated the relations between the rulers were. The Hittite kingdom, located in the center of Anatolia, controlled important roads used by merchants from Syria and Mesopotamia. Many smaller states depended on their goodwill and were forced to seek the protection of their powerful neighbor. The Hittites waged wars, concluded peace treaties, and tried to keep regions that were key to them under their influence. Therefore, any outside interference threatened to disrupt their carefully constructed system. Assyria was only gaining strength at that time, but it was already confidently asserting itself. It sought to expand its possessions and control the caravan routes passing through Mesopotamia. The Assyrian kings kept an eye on the situation in the west and realized that the struggle between Egypt and the Hittites could give them a chance to strengthen their position. This made the political picture of the region even more intense and unstable. Mycenaean Greece, referred to as Achaia in Hittite documents, occupied an intermediate position between the great powers and the periphery. It could not compete with Egypt or the Hittites in terms of scale, but it was distinguished by its energy and military activity. The Achaeans constantly sailed, establishing ties with the islands of the Aegean Sea and the coasts of Asia Minor. Their interests often intersected with those of other peoples, leading to tension. Achaean society was built around palaces, which served not only as the rulers' residences, but also as administrative centers. In Mycenae, tyrants and pylos, scribes, craftsmen, and warriors worked to create the complex system necessary to maintain power. These centers controlled metalworking and weapons production and sent ships in search of new markets. Their prosperity depended directly on the success of these expeditions. The military culture of the Achaeans was evident in everything. From an early age, young men were taught to use weapons and prepared for sea expeditions. Such expeditions were both trading trips and opportunities to capture trophies. Therefore, other peoples viewed the Achaeans with suspicion and tried to fortify their cities to protect themselves from possible attacks. The success of the Achaeans gave rise to new desires to expand their sphere of influence. Troy, which the Hittites called Velusa, occupied a key position at the entrance to the straits. Any ship heading for the Black Sea had to pass by its ports and fortifications. This gave the city the opportunity to control the movement of goods and collect trade duties. Therefore, Troy gradually became a wealthy center capable of competing with the most influential cities in the region. The Black Sea attracted traders with its variety of resources. Local tribes supplied wood, which was necessary for shipbuilding, as well as metals, without which it was impossible to make weapons. Horses, which were used in battle chariots, were particularly valuable. Control over these resources meant not only profit, but also military superiority, so the struggle for access to the northern lands was inevitable. Troy did not rely solely on its own strength. Behind it stood the powerful Hittite Empire, which saw the city as an important stronghold in the struggle for influence on the western coast of Anatolia. The Hittites did not want to lose such an ally and closely monitored what was happening in the region. This meant that any attack on Troy risked escalating into a larger conflict. Therefore, the Achaeans understood that their campaign would be fraught with great difficulties. Agamemnon's campaign had much more serious goals than those described in the myths. The Achaean rulers sought to eliminate a city that hindered their ambitions and restricted trade. The legend of Helen was a convenient explanation for the heroic poem, but the real motivation was the desire to gain control of the sea routes. It was a project that required enormous resources and lengthy preparation. The Achaeans managed to unite many cities, but their alliance was fragile. Each ruler participated in the campaign for his own benefit, hoping to obtain rich spoils. Such an alliance was often based on personal agreements and fear of losing prestige. Therefore, any delays or failures could undermine trust between allies and jeopardize the entire campaign. The long siege of Troy was a test for the Achaeans. They were forced to keep their army away from home, which required enormous supplies of food and materials. Despite stories of constant skirmishes, in reality, many months were spent waiting, which only complicated the situation. The soldiers grew weary and the commanders increasingly argued about how best to proceed. The Trojans, on the other hand, were in a more secure position. Their fortress walls were strong and allowed them to hold their defenses for a long time. Inside the city were warehouses with supplies that could last for a long time. In addition, they were helped by their proximity to the mainland, from where they could obtain reinforcements and food. This made the siege even more tedious for the Achaeans. With each passing year, the siege became more difficult. Disease, lack of resources, and constant tension eroded discipline in the army. The initial enthusiasm faded, and some soldiers began to think about returning home. But the commanders understood that retreating without victory would mean losing face and destroying their position. Therefore, they continued to hold out and look for a way to achieve success. Ultimately, Troy's defeat was the result of a long and exhausting confrontation, not a single brilliant maneuver. The Achaeans were able to achieve their goal only through perseverance and determination not to retreat, despite the difficulties. But even their victory turned out to be a Pyrrhic victory, as it led to the depletion of many cities in Greece. That is why, a few decades later, the entire region found itself in a state of crisis. And yet the main question remains the same. What would have happened if the Achaean campaign had ended differently? Let us imagine for a moment that the events at the walls of Troy unfolded according to a more realistic, pragmatic scenario. The siege drags on. The famous walls of Troy, 6, built to withstand battering rams and earthquakes, prove impregnable to Bronze Age technology. The Achaean camp is struck not just by the plague described in the Iliad, but by a full-blown epidemic, dysentery or typhus, the constant companions of large ancient armies confined to a single territory without proper sanitation. The conflict between Agamemnon and Achilles, or any other leader of the Thessalian troops, does not end in reconciliation. The offended best of the Achaeans simply weigh anchor. The loss of striking power and the decline in morale make continuing the siege pointless. Instead of a cunning plan with a horse, the Greek leaders make a difficult decision to save what remains of their fleet and their people. They burn their camp so that it does not fall into enemy hands and leave. For the Trojans, this looks like a miracle and a triumph of will. Hector, or the historical ruler of Alexandria, stands on the walls and watches as the invaders' sails disappear over the horizon. The city has survived. But for the Greeks, it is a disaster. They return not with rich spoils, slaves, and gold, which were supposed to pay for years of war, but empty-handed and with huge losses. The authority of Agamemnon, the king of kings, is destroyed. The return of the Achaean fleets home triggers a chain reaction of political collapse in Greece. The countries of the Aegean world were already exhausted by the long years of the expedition, and the expectation of rich spoils was replaced by bitter disappointment. People who had lost loved ones demanded explanations from their rulers, and rumors of the failure of the campaign spread faster than the ships themselves. Instead of solemn meetings, the leaders are met with cold hostility and growing distrust. With each passing day, it becomes increasingly clear that the old power structure is falling apart at the seams. Our history contains a cycle of myths about Nostos, the return of heroes who, after numerous trials, managed to establish themselves in their homeland. Such stories emphasize the value of personal valor and a leader's ability to restore their authority. However, in an alternative scenario, everything takes a different turn because the heroes themselves return not as victors, but as witnesses to their own defeat. Their glory fades, and their exploits begin to be perceived as exaggerated legends invented to justify failure. The people increasingly ask themselves why such a war was necessary in the first place. In the alternative scenario, the leaders return as failures. Mycenaean society, built on the authority of force and the distribution of military spoils, does not forgive weakness. Warriors accustomed to receiving their share of the loot find that they have returned empty-handed and begin to accuse their leaders of short-sightedness. Such sentiments quickly turn into open discontent as the failure of the campaign calls into question the very legitimacy of royal power. The first calls are heard to replace rulers who have failed to fulfill their promises. Rebellions break out in the palaces of Mycenae, Tiryns, and Argos. The local nobility, tired of paying taxes for a war that has brought nothing, decides that it is time to revise the old agreements. They gather supporters, calling for justice to be restored and an end to the endless spending on the ruler's adventures. The returning leaders try to hold on to power by force, but their troops are demoralized and unwilling to fight for those who have deprived them of their spoils. As a result, the Atreid dynasty is overthrown so rapidly that it marks the beginning of a long and bloody civil war of all against all. The civil war engulfs more and more regions. Various clans and local leaders try to take advantage of the chaos to strengthen their holdings, and each claims the right to be the head of the new order. However, the lack of a single center makes any attempts at negotiation almost impossible. While some fortify their strongholds, others plunder their neighbors in an attempt to make up for the lack of resources. The country gradually sinks into a state where old ties cease to matter. The unified cultural space of Achaean Greece is crumbling into dozens of warring enclaves much earlier and more rapidly than in reality. A common language, customs, and traditions still remain, but political disunity is becoming too deep. Each region begins to form its own rules, leading to a gradual loss of former unity. Workshops cease to receive raw materials, trade routes are severed, and crafts fall into decline. In such conditions, even art and religious practices begin to change rapidly. Meanwhile, new threats appear on the horizon. At the same time, the so-called peoples of the sea, a wave of migrants and warriors that actually swept across the eastern Mediterranean a little later, find Greece already in ruins. They quickly notice that the local centers of power are weakened and unable to fight back. Numerous coastal settlements prove to be easy prey because their defenders have either died in civil strife or have not returned from campaign. Raids become more frequent, and the remnants of the population try to seek refuge in the mountains. They encounter no organized resistance, which could have been provided by veterans of the Trojan War. The absence of trained and disciplined troops makes the invasion almost unhindered. In the past, such forces could have delayed the invaders and certainly inflicted serious damage on them. But now even large cities are unable to assemble a sufficient army. The fall of one center pulls others down with it, because no one can come to the aid of their neighbors. Greece seems to be falling apart into separate fragments that can no longer be put back together. The palaces are burning not in 1200, but already in 1230. Fires destroy archives that stored valuable documents, and with them, the memory of past achievements disappears. Greece is plunging into the Dark Ages more deeply and hopelessly than in real history, because the destruction is happening faster and more irreversibly. The population loses the linear B script, and new generations grow up in an environment where knowledge is no longer systematically transmitted. The skills of monumental construction disappear, and people return to more primitive forms of economy. Deprived of political stability and cultural unity, Greece leaves behind no great epic of victory. The memory of the campaign dissolves into endless disasters, and instead of tales of glory, only vague legends of ruined kingdoms remain. A new society is formed on the ruins of the old, but it is no longer capable of restoring its former greatness. Thus, the early collapse of Mycenae turns the history of the region into a completely different path of development, where hope gives way to prolonged decline. Troy, having preserved its integrity and wealth, enters a period of post-war renaissance. It is important to understand the strategic advantage of this city. Troy had a unique fortification system, sloping walls of hewn stone, which were extremely difficult to break through with primitive battering rams, and a developed water supply system inside the citadel. By retaining control of the Dardanelles Strait, the Trojans monopolized the flow of goods from the Black Sea region. At a time when iron was just beginning to come into use, access to Pontic iron and copper became a key factor in military superiority. The Trojan army, combining the traditions of Hittite chariot warfare and the skills of archers, for which Anatolia was famous, became the dominant force in the region. Unlike the Greeks, who relied on heavy infantry, the Trojans relied on maneuverability and the use of mercenaries, whom they could generously pay with duties from the straits. Troy did not seek territorial conquest deep in Asia, where the Hittite Empire was disintegrating. Its vector was the sea. The Trojan fleet, not destroyed by the Greeks, patrolled the Aegean, preventing pirates and the remnants of the Achaeans from disrupting trade routes. The city itself is growing. The lower city, where artisans and merchants lived, is getting new fortifications, turning into an impregnable Bronze Age metropolis. What if the power vacuum in the Aegean Sea is filled not from the west, but from the east? In our reality, after the fall of Troy, the Greeks began colonizing the coast of Asia Minor, Ionia, establishing great cities there: Miletus, Ephesus, Smyrna. In this scenario, the Greek colonization of Ionia does not take place. The coast remains under the control of the Anatolian peoples within the sphere of influence of Troy. Troy becomes the center of a new thalassocracy, maritime power. Its main competitors are the Phoenicians, who are rising in the south. The Mediterranean is divided into two spheres of influence: the south, Egypt, the Levant, Cyprus, under the control of Phoenician merchants, and the north, the Aegean, the Black Sea, northern Greece, under the control of the Trojans. The Greeks, confined to their peninsula and fragmented, found themselves in commercial isolation. They were forced to buy metals and luxury goods from Trojan intermediaries on unfavorable terms. The economic center of gravity of the region shifted to the northeast, Instead of Greek city-states, Neo-Hittite and Luwian city-states flourished on the shores of Turkey under the protectorate of Troy. Cultural exchange goes in the opposite direction. It is not the East that is Hellenized, but the Balkans that are strongly influenced by the East. Clothing, art, and music in mainland Greece borrow Anatolian motifs. Let us compare the well-known outcome with a possible alternative in the sphere of culture. The greatest legacy of the Trojan War was Homer's poems. The Iliad and the Odyssey do not simply tell stories. They shaped Greek ethics, language, religion, and self-awareness, Panhellenism. The Greeks felt themselves to be a united people precisely through their opposition to the Trojans. In the event of defeat, this unifying myth disappears. Instead of a heroic epic about victory, the Greeks are left with only mournful lamentations about the death of kings and the collapse of alliances. There is no figure of Achilles as a model of valor. There is no Odysseus as a model of intelligence. Greek religion remains more archaic, oriented toward local chthonic cults, without the Olympian pantheon unified by Homer. Trojan culture, on the other hand, is flourishing. Their language, probably Luwian, becomes the lingua franca in the northern Mediterranean. Trojan architecture dictates fashion. An example of a possible future can be seen in the rich trading posts that the Trojans established in Sicily and Sardinia. Centuries ahead of the Greeks, they seek metals in the West. Trojan ceramics, exquisite and expensive, displace the crude products of the Greek Dark Ages in the markets. Art becomes less anthropomorphic, more decorative and oriental, avoiding the nudity characteristic of Greek athletics. One detail, and the chain of consequences takes on a different logic on a millennial scale. The most intriguing aspect of Troy's survival concerns Rome. The Roman myth of origin states that the Trojan hero Aeneas fled the burning city, crossed the sea, and became the ancestor of the founders of Rome. This legend gave the Romans the right to consider themselves equal to the Greeks in antiquity, but different from them. If Troy does not fall, Aeneas has no reason to flee. He remains in Troy, possibly becoming the successor to King Priam. Consequently, Rome, if it ever emerged as a city, would be deprived of its noble Trojan myth. It would remain an Italic, perhaps Etruscan city, without any claim to the universal mission of a reborn Troy. Moreover, active Trojan expansion to the west could lead to Italy being colonized by the Anatolians much earlier. The Etruscans, whose origins are often linked to Asia Minor, could receive powerful support from the Metropolis. We can imagine Italy speaking the languages of the Anatolian group. The Roman Republic, deprived of cultural antagonism with Greece, since Greece is weak, develops as a normal regional state, possibly a vassal of the great Carthaginian or Trojan empires. The history of Europe without the dominance of classical Greek philosophy and Roman law, which grew out of Greek foundations, becomes unrecognizable. A unique model of society is forming within the surviving Troy itself. The city, which has survived turbulent decades, begins to rely not only on ancient dynastic traditions, but also on the power of wealthy merchants who finance construction, trade expeditions, and the city's defense. The king retains his honorary status, but his power is no longer absolute, and he has to take into account the interests of influential families. The Council of Elders gradually becomes the main body for making important decisions, especially those related to trade and security. This system makes Troy more flexible and stable than many other cities in the region. Religious life in Troy becomes much more open and diverse. Local Anatolian gods, such as the powerful Cybele, continue to play an important role in the lives of the townspeople, and their cults remain deeply revered. At the same time, New ideas brought by merchants from different shores of the Aegean and Black Seas are penetrating the city. The Temple of Athena Iliaca gradually became a place where pilgrims from different countries came, each bringing something of their own. Here, Athena ceased to be a warrior and became the guardian of the city, crafts, and wisdom. Over time, the temple complex became the largest spiritual center in the region. Its halls house relics brought by merchants as a sign of gratitude for successful voyages. Priests established special calendar holidays that attract pilgrims and merchants. The temple treasury grows, and income from pilgrimages becomes an important part of the city's economy. Religion in Troy becomes a force that strengthens the unity of different population groups. The absence of destructive war allows Troy to retain most of its population, which is rare in an era of general crisis. Craftsmen, sailors, and farmers continue to live in the city, while in other regions they have been destroyed by war or forced to migrate. Thanks to this, Troy quickly regains its strength and becomes a safe haven for refugees from less stable lands. The influx of people makes the city even more populous and diverse. This contributes to the development of crafts and the expansion of the city's territory. Demographic growth pushes Troy to establish new settlements along the shores of the Propontis, where there are convenient harbors and fertile lands. These new cities begin to replicate the structure of Troy itself, adopting its administrative and cultural characteristics. Close economic ties are established between them, which strengthen the influence of the Trojans in the region. The new settlements serve as transshipment points for trade with Thrace and the Black Sea regions. Over time, they turn into a network of bases that support the power of the main city. The strengthening of Troy's position made it an important player on the international stage. Merchants began to enter into long-term agreements with the Egyptians, Hittites, and even cities that had previously competed with Troy. Such cooperation was based on trust and mutual benefit, as well as on the understanding that Troy was capable of ensuring the safety of trade routes. Its fleet and fortified walls make the city a reliable partner. Many powers begin to view Troy as the main trading hub of the region. Troy's legal system probably inherited Hittite norms, which were more humane than the laws of Assyria or Babylon. The Hittite tradition allowed for the settlement of conflicts through monetary compensation, which made the law more flexible. This helped to avoid bloody feuds and preserve the workforce, which was so important to the economy. The inhabitants of Troy could count on fair trials even in complex cases. Such justice increased trust in the authorities and made the city attractive to foreigners. The favorable legal climate became an important factor in strengthening international trade. Merchants knew that their interests would be protected and disputes would be resolved quickly and without excessive violence. Under these conditions, the first promissory notes, agreements between trading houses, and even early forms of insurance appeared in Troy. The city's economy became increasingly complex and sophisticated. This ensured an influx of wealth and stability, even in difficult times. Gradually, Troy turned into a kind of Switzerland of the ancient world, a neutral and wealthy power that avoided unnecessary wars. Its rulers were convinced that diplomacy and trade were more beneficial than force, and therefore focused their efforts on strengthening the fleet and defensive structures. This made the city virtually inaccessible to invaders, as the cost of an attack was too high for any of its neighbors. Wealthy families pooled their resources to maintain well-trained warriors. Troy prospered in a world where many other societies were in decline. This development makes Troy a center of stability in a turbulent era. It becomes a place where different peoples can safely trade, exchange knowledge, and find refuge. Thanks to a combination of a strong economy, wise diplomacy, and a developed culture, the city maintains its influence for an entire generation. This changes the political landscape of the region and creates a completely different vision of the future for the Eastern Mediterranean. We are accustomed to seeing the fall of Troy as the beginning of European history, but if the city walls had held, the center of ancient civilization would have shifted to the eastern shore of the Aegean Sea. Greece would have remained a fragmented periphery, deprived of its main unifying myth and colonial expansion. Europe would not have received the Iliad, and Rome would not have received its legend of Aeneas. Instead of a world built on the ruins of Troy, we would have a world that grew up around it. A world where Anatolian culture would have become a bridge between East and West, perhaps making antiquity more Eastern, but also more stable, without a sharp decline into the Dark Ages. This is a reminder that the foundation of our culture was laid not only by victories, but also by how those victories were celebrated and used by future generations. Subscribe so you don't miss new versions of history.